One of the things that I wanted to talk to Kirsten about this morning was just she kind of, when we started talking about this writing kind of idea, her being a really great writer, she put it into like 3 buckets. And she called them the circles, and she started talking about these circles. I'm like, wow, you could tell you're a writer because you structure everything. So it was like really awesome to have her as a speaker. And the first circle she started talking about was the circle of content creation. So we're gonna start talking about that. And could you talk a little bit about what you came up with as far as the short form for long form and the differences between the two?
Sure, okay, good morning. So when we started talking about doing this and writing for social media and talking about that, what I've learned to do this past year and started doing is writing my long form content with the short form in mind. And that's really helped me become a better editor of my work. So an example of that is I have started writing with Twitter in mind. And I actually will have, if you follow me, Kiki Mojo, or even the hashtag for the breakfast, what I did today is I went through kind of what we were planning to talk about. And I made some points, like as we went through, and made them into tweets. So they'll be tweeting out, as long as my scheduler works, they will be tweeting out during the breakfast. And what that makes me do, so as I'm writing down, and my process, everybody's process for writing is different. And so embrace your process. Don't try to have somebody else's process. My process is I write what I call a vomit version, because literally that's what it is. I'm throwing every single word out onto the page, and then I go back and trim. So that's my process. And as I was doing that, I would come up with these points, and I was like, this is a great point. This will be perfect for Twitter. And then I'd go plug it into Twitter, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's too long. So then I would trim a little bit, and then I would go back in and I'm like, oh, that's perfect. Oh, but I have to add the hashtag. Now it's too long. So what that does is by the end, I would have this sentence. I thought, this is a pretty good sentence. This is going to be great on Twitter. And I would have to completely change it and edit it to actually fit on Twitter, and it made it a better sentence. So when I'm writing now, whether for my blog or something like this, even just planning what I'm going to talk, if I get those great shareable sentences or quotable sentences, plugging them in and having another window open with Twitter or Hootsuite or TweetDeck, whatever you're using, and then putting that in there and seeing how it actually fits, you find there's a lot more you can trim away to make a better sentence that you can actually, it's a great editor. And the other thing I learned, I told Kami this morning, I don't know how many of you guys know this. I feel like I learn things all the time and assume other people already knew them. But I didn't know that if you want things to be retweeted easily, that you need to leave 24 characters. Did everybody but me know this? No, this is new. Some of you are guessing and some of you are knowing. So if you leave 24 characters, that means if you're going to go retweet, you don't have like that thing like, oh, this is too long. And then you have to like, oh man, yeah, empty. And that's just annoying. Like nobody wants to do that. So if you want your tweet to be retweetable without any additions, you got to leave 24 characters. So, you know, when I started, I would have this great sentence. It's too long. I get it down, get the hashtag. It's still too long if I want it to be retweeted. So anyway, that's kind of how I've started using Twitter as a tool to be my editor and help me write better.
That's great. I actually came across that technique not that long ago, honestly. And I always tended to write in bullet points, you know, like I'd make an outline, if you will, and then kind of fill it in. And usually I thought of them as subheads. So I'd make my subheads and then I'd fill in the content along. But one of the ideas that I heard was exactly that, make your subheads tweetable. And then that was a great idea. So how do you like put that into your long form, like a blog post or whatever? How do you make that obvious in your long form?
Well, long form content, a lot of times people talk about that visual idea, like when you go in and you just see, I'll talk blog post, but even if it's a website or something else with a big long string of text, anytime someone comes across a big long string of text, it's like, you know, dead eyes. It's too much. So you need to break that up. And they'll suggest, using lists, using bullet points, using subheadings, having something visual. So for me, I've started using a tool, and I may be jumping ahead, but I'll just throw it in. I'm using WordPress, so I will use a tool that's called Easy Tweet Embed, and that's going to be tweeted as well at some point this morning. Easy Tweet Embed, and what that does is I can actually go in and click a little button inside my text when I have one of those tweetable sentences, and you can fill in, a little box comes up and you fill in what you want it to say, and you can add your tag so that that's in there as well. You can add a hashtag, whatever you want, and what text you want to appear both in the tweet and then also in your text. So for me, I always put like a little parentheses, click to tweet. And I think there's actually another tool called click to tweet that puts it like in a big box, and that just didn't work for me visually. So, but there's a couple tools you can use. So what will happen is, and then I'll usually go through and hold that sentence. So I'll have those powerful sentences punctuated through my writing in the blog post, and it'll say right there, click to tweet. And when people click that, a box pops up with whatever I want it to say with my, with @Kiki Mojo, so that when they tweet it, I'll know, and other people will be drawn back, and with a link to my blog post. And I told Cami I actually did an experiment this week, and I tracked, I wrote one blog post and did all the kinds of things you're supposed to do on Twitter. I posted images, I posted questions, I posted quotes from that blog post, at different times during the day, and tracked how well that did, and also did it on Facebook, which had like, I think two clicks and maybe 3 engagements on Twitter, and I had like 40 on Facebook. So, you kind of learn to know where your audience is. But what I noticed, which was really interesting, is that on Twitter, even though some of the ways that I shared my blog post were those same quotes that I had clicked to tweet, they didn't get retweeted. But I had 10 different people use that click to tweet feature in my post and share my content that way. So when I was using that same exact phrase, it didn't get retweeted, but people reading my content were like, I don't know if it was just because it's super easy to be like, yeah, I want to tweet that. You're kind of giving that power of suggestion. Like, of course I want to tweet that. It says click to tweet. I'm going to do that. So having that in there made my content more shareable. And you're also sometimes getting those people who are more engaged with you, who are reading your longer form content, and so they're more likely to want to share. So make it easy for them. And so that's the tool that I've kind of been using that's been very, very effective. I think I found every time I use that, and I don't do that in every blog post, or like I probably only do it 3 times a post. I'm not going to go like every paragraph, click to tweet. That would be very annoying. But I have found in those posts that I do that, my content gets shared much more often. The very first post I did, I think I had 12 or 13 shares, and then I had people that I didn't know retweeting those people who were tweeting me. And that also gives you control over what they're saying. So you don't have somebody, it's great when people share, but if they're like, hey, this is a really awesome post, nobody may click that. But if they're clicking to tweet, they have your words. So you're choosing and you're using your voice. So people are getting that. So you have a lot of control over the message.
I also like the idea that you have lots of choices in there, so people aren't forced to use one over the other. It's kind of interesting. So how many people here are not bloggers in OT? You do not do blogging. Okay, so we've been talking about sharing content from a blog post. What if I don't blog? What about then? How do we manage that for content?
Well, are you talking like other long form content?
Yeah.
Or
How do you use other people's?
Oh, like other people's, right? Okay, so sometimes this is actually easier because I think it's easier to edit somebody else's words, right? Like your own words, like these are great words. These are really great words. And so you have a hard time with your own stuff. But if you're going to somebody else's, it's a lot easier to be like, we're just a little judgy, I mean, we can all be our own worst critics, but at the same time, sometimes it's really easy to be judgy. So if you have the job or you're trying to share someone else's, what I would say to look for are those same kind of things, those tweetable quotes, those shareable little snackable pieces that you can put up on Twitter. And when you go in there, you might have to edit it, and you might be that person's best editor, taking out those extraneous things. Something I was thinking about as I was doing this talk is I feel like I don't know that Hemingway would have used Twitter to post like what he was having for breakfast. Maybe he would. I don't know. Hemingway would have loved Twitter because it makes you be sparse. It makes you use brevity and find that power in your language. So even if you're sharing somebody else's content, it makes you dig out those pieces and then cut out any of that like fat that you just don't need in there.
Yeah, and I do that a lot too. So I mean, it takes a little bit more work to share content on your social channels that isn't just the headline, right? Because somebody's already done the work for the headline. But I've found often if I don't like the headline, sometimes I'll go into the content. Say I really like a post, but I think the headline is sort of meh. I'll go into the post and I'll look for something in there that is really interesting to me, and then I'll kind of make that the lead. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, and I think, again, some people are great headline writers and some people are not. And so I do think what I have found is my content is better shared and better passed around, whatever form, when I'm using actual words. And I find, I don't know where you guys find that you click on, but I think that's a great thing to notice. And I notice that I will click on and follow through things more frequently if it's some kind of intriguing piece of writing. It's not a title. A lot of times I don't click on the titles unless they're really awesome, or, well, we're going to kind of get into that, but those ones that are kind of the clickbait, like, this grandfather met a cat. You won't believe what happens next. And I'm like, I know I shouldn't click. I know I shouldn't click, but what happens next? And so I do. I'm trying to get over that. But, and then you get there and you're like, well, yeah, I totally believe that. I totally believe that. That was a terrible headline, but I still clicked. So, a lot of times those headlines don't work, or even if they get people there, then they're annoyed because they're like, why did I click that? Yeah, so we're going to get back to that as well. But I think that for me, I noticed that I click less on the headlines and more quotes. So trying to find that, even if it's not yours, even if you're being the best editor for that other person who could have, you can find those pieces and that will be more shared.
Yeah, I'm a recovering Upworthy click person, so as well. So one of the things we talked about, which I think is really important, and right now we've been talking mostly about the actual written form of content, is layering. And I come from Colorado, so I really understand layering. I know you have to put on a light shirt, then a little bit of a jacket, then a heavy coat. But here in Texas, I know that a lot of you don't know what layering really is. So what I want to do is talk a little bit about layering in social media content. For instance, this week, I tried this. I was like, in preparation for this week, I'm like, I'm going to do something like this. And so I put out an old post, a very old post, like I wrote like 10 years ago, about the 6 principles of public relations by Arthur Page, who was the first AT&T corporate communications director. So, I mean, it's timeless. And I pulled it out, I changed it a little bit. I looked at my writing back then and went, wow, I thought that was really good back then. But yeah, okay, so added a few things, edited a few things. And then I went to Canva, which is something I'm just in love with, which is an online editing program. And I made a nice little graphic. I put Arthur Page on the side. I put the 6 points that he made and put a little headline. And then I took the old post and I put it on LinkedIn because I was trying to do some new things on LinkedIn, on the new publishing platform. And what I found was like that graphic, when I put it on Facebook, got shared and shared and shared, and it's still being shared today. I'm like, wow, that really worked. So we have like all of these different layers. Could you talk about layering like images with, like today we're doing a hangout on air. I mean, you've got the tweets going out, so you've got a lot of layers in this content today.
So, one of the things about social media that I find a little bit overwhelming is there are so many platforms and it's really hard to manage them all. But it's really great if you can, and maybe, focus on a few that really work. But if you're able to have different things like the Google Hangout, like an image that can be shared, like great quotes, different things will grab different people. And some of the people that are more visual, and really they say that people just generally are more visual. And so visual content gets shared. So even if you have a post that's all words that you don't have some kind of photo with, or some kind of message that does not have a photo, using a program like Cami uses Canva, I use PicMonkey. I really hate monkeys, so I wish maybe I'll switch to Canva because I hate using it, but it's a really easy tool. In about 5 minutes, you can plunk out a quote. You could take that great quote that you want to share on Twitter and you can put a background on it, you can get a good font, and then stick it up there and use that, whether it's with your tweet or putting it on, Google Plus, which, again, visually, you want to have a great visual there. Or if you want to pin it on Pinterest, if that's something that works for your brand. So one size doesn't fit all, and that's actually literally true with those photos. So I know Cami has a tool. Every single social platform requires or works better with a different sized visual, which is, just annoying. But if you can find that and take that few extra minutes to know what size visual you can use, it makes you look a lot more professional. Like, for example, how many of you guys use Google Plus? Kind of, okay. So if you use it a lot, like every now and then you'll go on there. I was in a group where we were kind of sharing Google Plus things, and you'd go in there and there'd be somebody and their Google Plus, their image, where it could be about this big on, on your screen, it was like this itty bitty bit image, and then they would just like have a hashtag, like no text, no quote. And I was like, why are you even taking the time? Like, is anyone even interested? You can't even see it. There's just a hashtag. What even is this? What is this about? And when I get really annoyed, sometimes I'd like leave a little comment like, I don't understand what this is, and then I'm like, I'm such a jerk, but I don't understand what that is. And so if they'd just taken the time they had an image to size it for Google Plus and actually put something there. So knowing the platform that you're using and doing kind of that research to know, like, what am I supposed to put in here? And then, again, if you don't have a photo and you're using the words, what words out of this whole post or long form content that I'm using, what are the words that should go on an image that people will share? And so I think that's really important. But if you can use video, anytime you can stack those different things, you're more likely, you just have more options for engagement from people. So, and what was the tool that?
Oh yeah, it's a French company, but I tweeted it out, and actually what they do is they keep track of all the sizing. It's a web page. So if you click on it, and you can go to any social media platform, and it's got all the sizing for the different things on there. So it's quick, it's easy. I think it even allows you to put your photo in there, and it'll help you size it. But I often just use it just to go and look up the size, and then I use a different tool. But yeah, so I mean, having that extra thing. Plus, I mean, we're always worried. I mean, I don't know about you, guy. I'm like, how do I make content for all these different platforms? I mean, I don't have time for all that. So what's great about what we're talking about here is you can take one piece of content and run it on all the platforms, but not like just stick it up and schedule it. I mean, you're catering it to each platform, and you're tailoring it, excuse me. So like on Google Plus today, we'll have the Google Hangout on air. So people that want to listen to the whole thing can. And then we're gonna have Kirsten's tweets, and maybe somebody like Sandra, who's not here today, but would take those tweets and she put them into a Storify. And then somebody might take the photo here and then put a photo together with like a quick blog post, or somebody might take just take 5 or 6 points and put it up on their Facebook page. I mean, you can take all the different contents and like chop it down into a bunch of different ways of using it, and literally make 7 or 8 pieces of content out of 1 hour of event. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's a great point you're making there on the layering. So moving on to the second part, which is really you're starting to talk about in a way, is clickable content. So the second circle of great writing on social media would be clickable content. Can you kind of explain what you mean by that?
Sure. Well, we all, kind of the goal of all of this social media is not to just throw your stuff up in a vacuum and have it disappear. You want it to find an audience, and hopefully not just find an audience, but be shared. There's kind of that dream of going viral, which I think can be a curse sometimes as well when that happens. But you want engagement. You want people to click on your thing. You want to drive them. You don't just want someone necessarily to stay just on your Twitter feed. You want them to go somewhere. You have something that you want to share with them that's longer. Usually some people are just, on that. But anyway, so this idea of clickable content kind of goes back again to the idea of having something that when people see it, there's a reaction. There's some kind of action that takes place. And a lot of times that action is you want to drive them to your website, to your blog, to some other place, to buy your book on Amazon. You want to drive them somewhere. So you've got to be thinking about, I think the great place to start is what do I click on? What makes me not just scroll? What makes me stop scrolling? And so I think whether that's, we've talked about a lot of these things already, whether that's a really great quote, something that's engaging, whether that's asking a question, whether that's some kind of call to action, whether it's an image, or using all three, and knowing those social media platforms and planning out so that it's tailored. And it takes a little more time. Like I have discovered, I use Hootsuite as a scheduler for Twitter and Facebook. And the problem with that, I mean, that's great, and it gets me on there and sharing. But the problem with that is, things like images on Twitter, those lovely, pretty images when you go through the feed that really, they do stop me often. When I post an image from Hootsuite, it will not show up in my Twitter feed. So it shows up as a link instead, and that's not what you want. So sometimes you do have to know, I think someone told me Buffer actually will show the image. So kind of doing your homework to find that out, because those are the things that are the most clicked on. And I think You want to be relevant to your brand. You want to represent, whether your brand is you or another actual professional brand. You want to be relevant to that brand. You want to be eye-catching, whether that's in the quote or the image. And then you also want to be a person. You want to be personable. And I think sometimes we think this idea of having a personality or kind of being personable is not professional. And there's for sure a case for that. But I think having personality does not make you unprofessional. It gets you noticed. And last night, I don't sleep a lot. I stay up really late every night because I have little kids. So the only time I get stuff done is late at night. And so is Chris Gloom in here? Yeah. Okay. So Chris tweeted last night about the breakfast and tagged me in it. And so, if you have time, the good thing to do when somebody tags you is I like to go through and I'm like, okay, let me go see who this person is. And so I clicked through to his blog and he has this really great post up on his site, which is chrisgloom.com. And it was all about how to not end up sort of lost on Twitter. And so I read through this whole thing. It's like 1 a.m. Like, why am I not sleeping? And he had this quote in there. He was, just talking about how not to get lost on Twitter. And he said, people will not read your blog posts unless they know and care who you are. And I thought that was really important and a great thing to know because, we all know that we're supposed to be sharing other people's content. We all know we're supposed to be sharing our own content and having that mix and being sort of that content creator. But if all you're doing is tossing out information, it's kind of robotic. And so, there's a couple ways that you can combat that. And one is sharing tweets that aren't links, having something to say. And, again, for your brand, like for me, I'm a lifestyle blogger, so I can get away with all kinds, and I do, whether I can or not, I do get away with a lot of stuff. And so this morning as I'm coming here, I had a tweet that was like, you saw my tweet. Yeah. The best thing to do if you have an event early in the morning is put on your makeup the night before, which I absolutely did. And, it stayed on. You got to choose the right makeup to have it stay on and not end up how to wash your face. But that's my tweet. But that's who I am. That's my brand, is just, I'm going to be really honest and humorous, and I'm a writer and a blogger, so I can get away with that. I'm not representing some other kind of corporate company. That's me. Which I love. But for you, maybe that's not what would represent your brand, but finding a way to infuse that personality into that brand and be a person. You want to be a person. You don't want to just be like this factory of information. You don't want to just be this headline factory where every hour you're tweeting out some kind of title to something. You want to be known. You want people to know that you're somebody. You're not a bot. You're not just some kind of like. So even if you are something you can do, just like a tiny tip, and again, I feel like a lot of times people know these things already. So if you do, just, you can nod along. But if you're retweeting something, if they leave you enough room, or if you want to do the MT and, modify the tweet. I used to think that was mentioning, and I was like, how does that make sense? But if you want to add something on the end of it, like have, whatever they had, their text, their link, and then like, or something that says a great read from, and then have their thing, or something that shows that you actually read it, shows that you actually are a person who's engaging with the content yourself. And again, that just sort of separates you out so that you have a personality. You are an actual living, breathing person. You're not just sort of, again, like kind of a robot or a bot on Twitter.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I'm very guilty of like the link thing. I send out millions of links every day. It's sort of what I do. Actually, it's funny because there are a lot of people that are using quotes. And I have my feelings about that, like other people's quotes, like the best Hemingway quote or the best whatever. How do you feel about that, like using other people's kind of quotes and being a quote machine? Because I've seen that too. A lot of accounts that they send out nothing but inspirational quotes or things like that.
Do you mean just like a quote with no link? Just like, hey, here's a quote. That would really annoy me. I don't follow a lot of people who just do that. I think the point is to mix it up. And I think that's what keeps it interesting. And maybe mixing it up for one person looks different than mixing it up for somebody else. But having, like going back to that layering, like not just having one avenue, not just having one thing. Even if you have a primary focus, that focus can be shared in many ways. That focus can be shared, through quotes, through images, through video, through a mix of things, through retweeting people, through, sharing a link that's not a retweet. Like I also do a ton of retweeting through the day, and it's really easy when I have those lists in Hootsuite I have lists of like people I usually want to share from. I think that's what I call it. And I make them all private, so no one's seeing my list. Like, people you want to share from, people I don't like, but I follow them anyway. You know, I don't want people to see those list names, so they're all private. I don't actually have one like that. I should, but I don't. No, you're not. You're my people to tweet from, of course, Amy. That's why I'm here. But you know, I do go through and retweet, but I think having a mix of those things, or even if you go through and follow a link and you really like it, instead of retweeting it, maybe you pull your own quote from that person. Because sometimes that'll happen is I'll have somebody ask me to share something, and I'll go look at, and the way they want it shared, I'm like, that's not really how I want to share it. You know, if I want to share it, I'm going to go ahead and pull something else out. I'm going to use their image, because why didn't they use their image in the first place? Their image is much better than this headline they chose or this quote. So, you know, it takes a little bit of extra time sometimes, but it's kind of part of being a good content curator. You know, you are presenting this information to people, and the way that you package it affects how they interact with it.
And that kind of leads us right into the third circle, and that is really around the community. So what you're talking about here also is a way to build community, I think. So how do you build community around your content and with other people?
Community is one of those, like, you know, fancy keyword. Everybody's talking about community. You want to have community, but I think that looks really, really different on your different platforms. So the community I might have on my blog is really different than the community I might have on my Facebook profile or my Facebook page. Totally different communities. And Twitter, which I find it, you know, really hard on Twitter, especially to have a community, because Twitter is so fast-paced. It's just go, go, go. So unless you're involved in like a Twitter party, which I do some, I really hate them. I don't know if you guys do them. I hate them in terms of enjoyment. Like, they're just, it makes me crazy to have all these things I'm following, but they're great. I mean, it is a great way to connect. And when I do them, I'm like, okay, I met a bunch of people. It's great, but I don't like doing them. So finding what brings you community. And I think the definition of community in terms of social media is a continued interaction. And a continued intentional interaction. So it's not always, it doesn't mean you're like BFFs, you know, it doesn't mean you know that person in real life or you even want to meet them in real life, but there's an interaction that goes back and forth. And that's kind of what that idea of community is. And so again, like, it builds on that idea of clickable content, because if somebody isn't interested in what you're saying, they're not going to interact with you. So they might just share something, and then your response can be, you know, even the simple, I mean, we all kind of know the rules of Twitter. If somebody shares something, you're supposed to like thank them. I mean, that's really just a nice general, like, hey, I noticed that you shared that. I appreciate that. Not the automatic direct messages. And I know a lot of people do them. I understand why, but that kind of thing doesn't make you seem personable. So kind of this idea of community is building the people who interact with you and interacting back with those people. And again, all these things, like, as I'm talking, I'm like, oh, this is just so much time, because I know what it means for me. I recently started a series on my blog. It's a 31-day of small steps to grow your blog. And I really want to build community, and I have some new people reading, you know, this month that weren't reading before. And so I made a little Facebook community, and I'm actually getting a lot more comments than I usually do. And so I'm trying really hard to answer all those comments. And so I realize all of these things I'm telling you to do just take more time. And for me, I'm like, oh no. But finding that really pays off, because what that does is it keeps people in your content. So finding out what that community looks like for whatever content and whatever platform you're using. And I think one of the best ways to do that is to write for your audience, which you really can't do unless you know your audience. Like, you can in your mind, I think it's always a good idea, even if you don't know your audience, if you know who you want your audience to be, imagining that person as you're writing, what would get them, like, I don't know why I was kind of jotting down my ideas. I was thinking of like hipsters, and you know, I have some kind of hipster friends, and I was like, okay, so your job, I want to get that hipster off their couch. Not that hipsters just sit on couches, but I'm like, okay, so I'm picturing that hipster on the couch. What am I going to say that's going to get them up? And again, no offense, because I have lots of hipster friends. But anyway, you know, just picking that, whoever that person is, what do you want them to do, and how are you going to get them to do it? How are you going to get them to respond to what it is you're saying? And Kimmy mentioned I'm in roller derby, and you know, it really is a vast, you know, just a wide variety of people who do roller derby. It's very interesting. And one of my teammates a couple years ago, her husband was kind of, he's got this really long ponytail. He's the kind of guy who sits around drinking beer on the weekends and like smoking stuff on the grill. Not smoking stuff, grilling things. He grills stuff. Not smoking things, sorry. So anyway, he comes to all the games and does stuff. And so one of the games we showed up and we're warming up and he ran up to me and he was like, Kiki, because everybody there calls me that. And I was like, yeah. And he said, I made laundry detergent this week. And I was like, what? I'm in skating mode. I'm like, what are you talking about? He's like, I used your recipe to make laundry detergent. And I just looked at him and I was like, first of all, I was like, you're reading my blog? Like, okay. And yeah, I know. I have no idea. And you made laundry detergent? I was like, what did your wife say? He's like, she said I'm crazy. She doesn't read my blog. Her husband reads my blog. And that was absolutely not who I thought was reading my blog. But now that I know that, even if he's not still reading my blog and making laundry detergent, I picture him and I'm like, okay, he might be reading my blog. Like, does this relate at all to him? So having even that specific image in mind, and if you connect with people and people connect with you, go in to check their blog. Even if you can't, like, I don't have time to be a great blog reader. I have a few that I read, but I just don't have time to go to everybody. But if someone's commenting, taking that time to click through just to see who they are. So you have in mind that audience that you're writing for. And I think when you have that audience in mind, it makes you a better writer because you're writing for someone. You're not writing to a vacuum. You're not writing to a void. So even if you don't, again, actually physically connect with those people, knowing who you want to connect with, and then responding to the people who do connect to you, you have a sense of who your audience is.
Yeah, in marketing, we call them personas, for those of you who are marketers. So let's talk, I just want, before we get into questions, which I want to leave a little bit of time for, let's talk for just a second about sort of the dark underbelly of community in social media. So, I like to call it the dark web because, there's like thousands and thousands of Facebook groups out there that are meeting and pretty much they are, click on my stuff, tweet my stuff. It's like tweet for tweet, share my stuff, I'll share your stuff. Can you kind of talk about that a little bit? Because I don't know if everybody knows that even exists.
Okay, and I should be clear, I didn't know that existed until like this year. I used to blog kind of in a vacuum, and I went to a blogging conference last year and actually made all these connections. I was like, there's other people doing this, cool. And I mean, I knew they were, but I just didn't know who they were. And then kind of saw how people were doing things. So it's come to my attention, and now I'm in a few of these. There's a just vast number of Facebook groups out there, and they're usually like a secret or closed group, like you're not going to go find them. And they are often, kind of a support group. And I think that's how they all probably started out, was in a good, in a good place. Like, let's support each other. And I'm in a couple of those groups, I'm with Cammie, where we support each other, and ask each other questions. Like, as I was trying to track tweets this week, I'm like, what is the best way to track tweets? It's hard to say, track tweets. And reached out to people asking for their advice and that kind of thing. But some of these groups that exist, one that I actually just left this week because I found I just feel icky. I just can't do it. But so it was a Google Plus group, because sometimes it's really hard to get interaction on Google Plus, but it matters when you get that interaction right now on Google Plus, right? You want that. And so I was on a friend's page, and she really didn't have very many people in a circle, and had all these likes or not likes, pluses. I gotta use the right language. She had all these pluses, and so I was like, how are you getting this interaction? What are you doing? And she's like, oh, I'm in this cool group and we support each other. I was like, oh, that's great. So I got into this group, and again, I want to be clear. Like, I'm not passing any judgment. I just want to say that this is out there and how it is for me. So I got into this group, and some of the groups, you support each other and ask questions. Some of the groups, there's like a weekly thread, like, hey, if you have time, share this link. And if you're in those groups with people that you respect and you want to share their work, I don't see any problem with it. It's great. You're helping each other succeed. You're lifting other people up. They're lifting you up. But some of them, like this particular group, for me, it started to feel icky because the requirement was that if you left a thread, you had, or left a link in the thread, you had to respond to every single one. And that's fine if you like the content. Now, if you don't, and that's where I started to feel really icky, because I was like, I don't want to +1 this. I don't want to look at this person. I don't want them in my circle. Most of the people, I'm like, add me to my circle, great stuff. And then there's a few, but I'm required, if I'm leaving something, that I've got to do it. And so I left that group this week because I was like, I just that there are all these behind the scenes groups, whether it's for support or just a trading off, like you must do every one of these. And so this is happening, you know, whether that's something you want to be a part of, or sometimes, you know, I think it's good for brands to know, like, wow, we're getting all this interaction. Well, it might be that there's something going on in the back end you don't know about. So I think it's good, you know, kind of as you're thinking about all these ideas of community and what's clickable and getting shared and engagement, to be authentic. And I think you know for you what that feels like, you know, right? I mean, you have that icky feeling when it's something that is not authentic to who you are, even if it's okay. Like if nobody else is leaving that group, I don't care. They can, you know, I have friends in that group, they can stay in that group. For me, I can't do it. And the same thing, kind of as I mentioned, those kinds of headlines, you know, like you're not going to believe this happened, or the best thing ever, or, you know, those ones that, you know, they just make you click and then you get there and it's not at all what they said it was going to be. It takes away that trust of your audience. And so you want to think about kind of the ethical,
even if it works.
Even if it works, is it worth it? And also, you know, if it works to get someone to click once, are they going to stay? You know, because I think the best thing, you know, at this blog conference, I don't know if you heard this, there's a group, not group, but there's a couple and they run a blog called Pinch of Yum, and they're food bloggers. They're fabulous, fabulous. And he had a quote where he said, trust is the best currency that you can have online. And you don't want to compromise that. And so for whatever that looks like for you with your audience, and to keep a community, if you break that trust by having some kind of like dumb link, you know, in there, or, you know, even if sometimes, you know, like I'll do sponsored posts sometimes, and I'm kind of even reconsidering what sponsored posts I'm doing. Because if you start to get that icky feeling, like, is this who I am? Is this who I want to be? Is this who I want people to think that I am? And is this how I want to achieve success? Is this how I want to make money? And I think those are all questions to answer, because it all goes back to that sort of sense of your identity, your sense of authenticity. And I think that does affect your community. So,
very good. Very well said. So the last thing I want to ask you before we open it up to questions is, could you wrap all of this up into a little kind of a bow for us? What are your top tips really for social media and writing for social media? Do you have like just a handful of things that you would be willing to say are your top tips? Great.
I think the most important is to know yourself or your brand. Because if you know who you are and kind of have that down, I think it makes everything else fall into place more easily. And then you can weigh the things that you're doing against that. Is this who I am? Is this post something that goes along with who I am? So I think knowing yourself or your brand, knowing the platform, again, like we were saying with it, even like little things like the image sizing, knowing how you're sharing and what works there, and knowing your audience in whatever way you can. And, you know, again, if you get to be sort of like huge and you have all these people tweeting at you, like clearly you can't engage with everybody, but in what ways can you take those, whether it's small steps or big steps, in what way can you know your audience and engage with them? And so I think if you're doing those things, and then with, you know, in terms of writing, it just really takes that time. Like, you know, I think a lot of people, and maybe people do, but I don't think people think of drafting tweets, you know, writing out a tweet and then like really looking at it like, okay, do all these words need to be here? You know, is this really representing me? And I'll leave you with a thought that I had. So I have my MFA in fiction, Master of Fine Arts in Fiction. And one of my professors who was a published writer, he said, a lot of people think that short stories are easy to write because of the length, and that novels, because they're so long, are really difficult. And he said the opposite is actually true, because in a short story, everything needs to be perfect, because you don't have all this wiggle room that you have in the 200, 400 pages of a novel to have things that don't quite need to be there, to have a little more squish room in a novel, whereas in a short story, everything needs to be perfect. Everything has to need to be there because it's in this tight little package. And I think the same is true whether it's Twitter, which is the smallest, I think, of the packages, or any of the other social media that a lot of times we think we really need to work on the long form content, to proofread, to get all those words right, but the short form, we'll just throw up a tweet. And I think if we start thinking of it in a different way, thinking of like, okay, I only have 140 characters or less if I want to retweet it and I'm using hashtags, I need this to be perfect. I need this to be really, really good. I think we'd be putting out better content. I think if we start thinking of it kind of not in the way we normally do, but thinking of those social shares as just as important as our long form content, that we would be overall doing a better job.
I think another historical figure that would have been great at Twitter would have been like Abraham Lincoln, right? Yeah, would have been awesome. Anyway, great. So does anybody have any questions? Like, what are you doing right now? And yeah.
I have a question about, like, say, like for people who try to gain followers. I've noticed that some might use this separately, buy followers, you know, and there's like, what would you say to that, you know, to those people who are looking to build the followers?
So he asked about what are you looking, if people are looking to build followers, how would they go about that with content?
You know, it's really hard. I mean, I think there's a lot of, you could Google that and find a ton of like answers. And this year, since going to a blog conference, I found a lot of really easy answers. Like you can do giveaways and have people follow you on Twitter or follow your blog or do whatever for those. And I've done some of those and I do them every now and then. And what I find happens is those aren't the people that stick. Those are not the people that will stay and engage with you. But yeah, my numbers look awesome. They don't actually, but you know, they look more awesome than they did last month. But does that actually mean engagement? No. For me, I think the best way is really kind of some of these same things, like really genuinely interacting with people and finding that time. Writing great content, first of all. I mean, you need to write great content, but then, you know, we've all seen those sites or those blogs or those people that have like 1 zillion followers and you're like, how? You know, it's the same way when you go to like a bookstore, you know, as a writer, I look at these things that are published, I'm like, really? And I'm not, why am I not published? Because look at this is just terrible. You know, you read something, you're like, how did this get published? I think the same thing, you need to have that great content, but then being authentic in your interactions. And that's, I mean, there's other ways to do it. There's cheap tricks, but I think if you want to have a real following, you need to be you and you need to be authentic. Otherwise, you're just going to have numbers and you want people behind those numbers, like real people.
I totally agree with her, and I guess because that's the way I've done it. So, you know, I never did the cheap tricks to get followers on Twitter, and I have a fairly good following now, but I probably could have had a lot better if I'd done the cheap tricks. So early on in Twitter, I mean, I learned that a follow for a follow worked really well. So like if you follow everybody who follows you, then yeah, I mean, you're going to keep growing. But then you're also going to end up with a bunch of people on that are following you that have nothing to do with what you do. Do you know what I'm saying? It just makes no difference. You want to have the right followers. That's how I feel about it. And if it puts me lower on a list, I don't care. Do you know what I'm saying? Because it's really not about the list. It's about the authentic community that I create. A great way is coming to this breakfast. How many of you go back through Twitter and read the hashtag later and follow people that say interesting things? Raise your hand. So, I mean, in this room, there's about 100 followers. You know what I'm saying? If you do it the right way. You know what I'm saying? So there's add value and people will follow you because they want value. People don't need a bunch of junk in their stream. And I'm, you know, really judicious about who I add to my must follow list, you know, the list that I actually retweet from. I look at my main list a lot and, you know, if people keep popping up in there and I'm like, wow, they keep saying amazing things, I'll add them to my list. Because I need a lot of content every day because I tweet about 10 times a day and I want to have great content. I can't write all that content. So you guys have to write some of it.
One more thing that I forgot, especially with Twitter, what I found as well, since I'm a writer, if I would go, sometimes I'm just bored and like watching Netflix and stuff and binging on things. I would go, yeah, a hipster on the couch. I would go and find somebody that I admire, a blogger or writer, and go through who follows them. And I wouldn't follow everybody, but I would kind of like, especially if people don't have, like, I will just say, like, if you don't have something interesting for that little description on Twitter, like, no, if you have like the little egg as your image, I don't understand the little egg. You know, no, but if I see someone, I'm like, that sounds intriguing. you know, I'll follow them. And I used one of those services that for a while where you can see who follows you back and you can unfollow them. And I was like, that's just annoying and jerky. So for me, that's how I felt. So I just stopped. But every now and then, like, I'll go through because I think, okay, this person seems interesting and they might like me. And maybe they won't follow me back, but if they do, I think they're going to like what I have to say. So that's another way that you can get some people in contact with you.
Questions? Other questions? Is anybody like struggling with getting writing up a lot? Raise your hand if you struggle from time to time to like actually get stuff up. Do you have any questions about like how about for people who struggle with time or just finding things to say? Like, how do you come up with that? Because it's not like you have lots of time on your hands. She's just had another baby. She's like busy. Kind of explain your process for that.
Well, unfortunately, you can't add more time. I just sleep less. That's my solution for finding more time, and putting makeup on the night before, so you can just roll out and go. But that may not help everybody. So yeah, I can't say anything to adding time, but I think for content, you know, trying to keep, because it's really hard. You know, some people keep these great editorial calendars. My brain works backwards, and so that doesn't work for me. But you could do an editorial calendar or have some kind of great list of like, I'm going to do this on this day. If that's how your brain works, that's awesome, and that can really help you. If you're like me and you're a little bit more random, you know, keeping even like a notes thing open on your phone, like this has got to be a blog post, you know, like I had some really weird stuff happen to me this week, and so I made a list like, and I'm going to write a post like life is weird because I just had some crazy stuff happen, you know, whatever it is that inspires you, whether it's something you actually plan out. And I probably have half and half, like right now, like I said, I'm doing this series on my blog that's really structured, and it's really challenging me because generally I do blog, like I do food blogging as well on there. And it's like today, Kimmy got to have some food this week, but it's like today I want to have champagne, but I can't drink a whole bottle of champagne. I can't, I shouldn't. And so I'm going to also do something with it. I'm going to make champagne cupcakes, and my brain kind of works that way. And I'm like, champagne cupcakes, that sounds great. I'm going to do this. So, you know, that's kind of how I work. So last week, you know, I didn't have that planned out. I made champagne cupcakes, and Kimmy got to have one. We were talking.
Over at the right time.
I know, perfect planning for her. And so for me, I'm a little bit more random, but I will keep that list down so that if I'm at that point where I'm like, man, nothing interesting has happened to me. I just feel dead. I don't feel like baking. My kids are boring this week. I don't have anything to write about. I'll go back to that list. My kids are actually never boring, but you know, I'll go back to that list and be like, oh, that's right. I wanted to write about what it looks like to travel with children, which is chaos. That's what it looks like. You know, but having that list so that you can go back if you're not inspired, because it's great if you're actually inspired, because I think sometimes you write better when you're like, I'm inspired, but you're not always inspired. So that would be kind of my thing, is to keep a list on hand so that when you don't have something that's actually like emotionally moving you to write, you have something you can go back to.
I also have a bookmarking service called Diggo, and you can use Delicious or whatever. And whenever I read something that I think is really interesting and it makes me have a thought, I'm a musician, so I like to riff. I don't know if you know what riffing means, but like you're listening to a song and then you start hearing another melody that goes with it. That's what, you know, you kind of riff around that. So I like to like take blog posts, and by the way, this builds community really well too. So if you read something like she riffed on you today, right? So she's riffing on what you wrote. And then like, you know, you would maybe write a blog post about what he wrote, but have your take on it. And say, but it would link to him, and then he'd come and look at that and say, wow, that's cool. And then maybe some of other people would come and they'd say, wow, that's interesting. And they'd say another thing. So you're developing ideas. So in business blogging, that works really, really well. Really well. Yeah.
So I'm fairly new to blogging, and whenever I write something up, I never feel like it's done. Like it's never perfect enough to feel like it should be posted.
Okay, so he says he writes stuff and he never feels like it's done, like it's perfect. I actually, do you have something immediate? I actually have something to say about that, because I used to feel that way, because I am a perfectionist, and I think I still do that sometimes. But way back, like, I don't know, 5 years ago, probably, somebody taught me that you should leave your blog post unfinished, because it inspires people then to write. So like the comments and stuff, if you write a really finished blog post, like, here's my theory, and I do a lot of these. It's like cricket, cricket, cricket. And I mean, people might have read it, but they don't want to put anything else. They're like, okay, this sounds like she's done thinking about this. But, and I would love for somebody to say, something else, because you don't want people, honestly, you don't want a bunch of great posts. I mean, they're nice and it's all great, attaboy, patting in the back. But what I really would love is people to say, I really think you're full of it in this point, and here's why. And here's what you should think about. Or I want people to say, wow, it made me think about something, and here's another thought I had. Because then we're forwarding the profession together. Do you know what I'm saying? So I would say unfinished blog posts are awesome. And you can even say that. You can say, you know what? I feel like there's more to be said on this, but you guys are so smart. Why don't you tell me what you think? And you'd be shocked. People might actually do that.
Yeah, I would say as well, like sometimes, I said earlier, it's easier to edit someone else's work. But again, we are often our own worst critics. And I think sometimes we think, who's going to want to read this? Who is reading this? Especially if you're just starting out and you're like, my mom read this, and yay, thanks, Mom. I've got my one comment from my mom. But, you have to kind of believe in yourself and just say, like, no, it's not going to be finished. It's never going to be perfect. It's never going to be perfect. That does not mean you should have a post full of, like, grammatical mistakes or, like, tweet language, like using the number 2 instead of 2. Do not do that. But if you mean it's unfinished in the sense that you don't feel, that all the knowledge is there, or you don't feel like you're good enough, because that's sometimes what people feel like who's going to want to read this? So you don't post it and you just keep it to draft. I met someone at the blogging conference who's like, well, I have my blog domain. I've been writing posts for a year and I know one of them. And I was like, what? And she was like, well, I just don't know who would want to read it. And I was like, oh my gosh, somebody other than you, if you just posted it, I mean, how bad can it be if you're writing that often? Like, surely you're getting to be a better writer. So anyway, it does feel a little bit like you're blogging into a void at first, and it may just be your mom. My mom she sends me messages all the time, like, I can't believe you said that on Facebook. And I'm like, I'm not taking it down, Mom, And so I'd rather she didn't read it sometimes. Hopefully she's not watching this. Yeah, hey, Mom. But yeah, at some point you just have to hit publish. And like Cami said, I think the unfinished thought sometimes, and I find, I've been writing a lot of, like, working on planning some posts, like, okay, I think this would do well on Pinterest. And so I'll do a post that I'm like, this is something that is authentic to me, but I also am planning it, kind of being smart and savvy, planning that for Pinterest, and it'll get some hits. And then this week, my husband is a youth pastor. And so Sundays for us, they're just a mess. And so I wrote a post, Confessions of a Pastor's Wife. I hate Sundays. And I don't want to hate them, but I do. Especially with the kids. I think if we didn't have 4 little kids, it would just be absolutely different. But we do. And so I wrote that post, and that has been like my most traffic the whole month, is people sharing this. And I was like, did I get you in trouble at work? Has anyone at work read this post? Are you going to get fired? I don't think so yet. But, sometimes it's those posts that you don't plan, but that are really authentic. And so I think if we're waiting for that perfect moment, or waiting for that moment, like, I've really got to get, and again, I didn't have any answers. It wasn't like, so here's the 3 tips for pastors' wives. It was like, it ended like, no, I just kind of hate Sundays. Apparently a lot of other people do too. And so it's been a really trafficked post. So yeah, don't wait till it's finished. Don't wait till it's perfect. Edit, yes, but don't think it has to be a certain place.
Sorry, hit myself. My teeth out. Hey. Actually, there's somebody back here. Let me get, yes. Oh, she was asking about the tools, and I actually wrote them down because I knew this would be a question. Thank you for helping me out here. We talked about Lightroom. Adobe Lightroom is a really great one if you are a photographer, because if you have lots of pictures, like I find myself with hundreds of pictures now, especially with this lovely little contraption here. And they all go up to Dropbox right now. And I'm like, I know I took a picture of something like that once, how do you find it? Well, Lightroom will help you with that. Also, if you want to add your watermark to it, you can add a watermark to, like I say, 100 pictures all at the same time. That's really helpful because that takes lots of time for photographers. Creative Suite, which is the Adobe Creative Suite, they have an online version of it for $10 a month, which is Photoshop and all that. So if you need something a little bit more hefty, that you could do that. PicMonkey is free and very easy to use. And then I use another one called Canva, C-A-N-V-A. And I mean, I'm like, it turned me into a graphic designer overnight, literally. So I've done like 100 graphic designs in the last month. I'm like, love it. Anyway, so you can look on my Facebook page and you'll see my most recent graphic that I did. And you shared it, so thank you, Justin. So anyway, it brought back school memories for him. So he shared it because it was the Arthur Page's 6 principles. So we are really out of time. I would love to spend some more time. Do you have a few minutes afterwards if anybody wants to say hi? I do need to really quickly do job listings. And by the way, if your husband loses his job, my church is hiring a youth pastor, just so you know. All right, I'll get that one out of the way. So I know that Loida had something. So could you come up and tell us your job openings? And you can actually shut down. Yeah. Thanks out, Goland. Glad you joined us.